Good evening and welcome to Aware on the Air. I'm Carl Estabrook. Our program is presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group. In the 32nd week of 2014, a week in which the Obama administration had two bloody hands in Eastern Europe and Southwest Asia, squeezing the life out of men, women, and children. The hands are called Ukraine and Israel, and we Americans are responsible for what the U.S. government is doing with them. In 2011, after killing U.S. citizen Anwar al-Awlaki and his son in separate drone strikes, President Obama said, quote, "Turns out I'm really good at killing people. Didn't know that was going to be a strong suit of mine," close quote. On his orders, 5,000 people have been killed with drones, including 200 children. Last Friday, after the revelation that his CIA director, John Brennan, lied about CIA activities in regard to the still unreleased Senate Intelligence Committee report on torture, President Obama admitted casually, quote, "We tortured some folks," close quote. Later, it turned out that Obama's claim to have banned all forms of torture was false. He admitted casually that he banned only some of the CIA's torture techniques. President Obama has shown himself, in fact, willing to kill thousands of men, women, and children as a minion of the 1%, because the president's crimes of torture and murder are certainly not in the interests of most Americans. Only those who want to maintain the American 1%'s control over the world economy, which they've enjoyed since the Second World War. To maintain that control, Washington uses its 1,000 military bases around the world and its special forces active in 124 countries. Their activities include kidnapping, we call it rendition, murder, and torture. This month, murders are also being carried out by two client states of the U.S., Israel and Ukraine, the bloody hands of the Obama administration in Europe and Asia. Israel has massacred almost 2,000 people in Gaza, mostly civilians, and the U.S.-backed and installed government in Kiev has killed almost as many in eastern Ukraine, the Donbas region. And its war has resulted in the destruction of a commercial airliner that killed 298 men, women, and children. Who is responsible for mass murder in Gaza and Donbass? Of course, their leaders can be blamed for Israel and Ukraine's committing what the Nuremberg Tribunal called the supreme international crime, that is, worse than terrorism, waging aggressive war. But the final responsibility lies with the President of the United States. Without the support, economic, military, political, and diplomatic, that the U.S. government provides, Israel's crimes would not be possible, and neither would the coup and military assaults by the Ukrainian government. President Obama failed to stop Israel's ongoing murders in Gaza, as he could have done with a word, because it's been the policy of all U.S. administrations for 2 generations to allow the Israelis to continue their oppression of the Palestinians so long as Israel acts as a stationary aircraft carrier for U.S. control of Mideast gas and oil. In Eastern Europe, the U.S. immediately violated its promise not to extend NATO to the borders of Russia and is now scheming to do so through Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova. President Obama's administration engineered the coup against an elected government in Ukraine and sent the CIA chief, Brennan, to encourage a Ukrainian army attack on the regions that resisted the new government, the first government in Europe since World War II to include fascist parties. How much longer will Americans put up with a murderous president in Washington who can smile and yet be a villain? Will the pictures of dead children for whom he's responsible lead to his being driven from office, as Presidents Johnson and Nixon were? Will his failure to provide jobs and economic relief for millions of Americans, what he was elected for, lead to his impeachment? Will the real distress of most Americans finally boil over into direct opposition to the Obama administration? The Pentagon thinks it's a possibility. The Guardian newspaper in London reports that the U.S. military is preparing for mass civil breakdown. Quote, the multi-million-dollar program is designed to develop immediate and long-term warfighter-relevant insights. They talk like this at the Pentagon. For senior officials and decision makers in the defense policy community, and to inform policy implemented by combatant commands, that is, against U.S. citizens. But Obama's main task is to cover over the wars he's sponsoring, the murders he's committing, and the misery he's causing. 3/4 of Americans disapprove of the wars of the Bush-Obama years, and the billions of dollars spent on them that could have been used here at home. Obama was elected to end the wars and provide jobs. He hasn't done either one, and Americans' anger is growing. His job is to turn aside that anger. One way that's done is to use a compliant media to misrepresent the Obama administration's military and economic policies. Our task here at Aware on the Air, like similar independent programs around the country, is to combat that overwhelming propaganda. We'll try to do that tonight with reports and comments from Karen Aram, Karen Evans-Levy, Pam Carsey, David Johnson, Ron Zoke, Yakov Ziso, and a reflection on the anniversary of Hiroshima. And we'll begin with Ron Zoke on our muddled media.
I'm alluding to a piece that appeared in the New York Times website today, Gaza War Strains Relations Between U.S. and Israel. The former U.S. ambassador to Israel, who now teaches at Princeton, said, I don't know how the relationship between the USA and Israel recovers as long as you have this president and this prime minister. Hint, hint. With public opinion in both Israel and the United States solidly behind the Israeli military's campaign against Hamas, no outcry from Israel's Arab neighbors, and unstinting support for Israel on Capitol Hill, President Obama had few obvious levers to force Mr. Netanyahu to stop pounding targets in Gaza until he was ready to do it. And there's more on this theme of the strained relationship between the USA and Israel, which is viewed as a very, very bad thing, and in fact inexcusable. Quoting, for all its outrage over civilian casualties, the United States steadfastly backs Israel's right to defend itself, ta-da, old cliche, and shares Israel's view that Hamas is a terrorist organization in a world of bitter enmities. The Israeli-American dispute is more akin to a family quarrel. Disputes between the United States and Israel are hardly new. President Ronald Reagan sold AWACS surveillance planes to Saudi Arabia over Israel's fierce objections. George H.W. Bush held up loan guarantees because of Israeli settlement construction. Bill Clinton fumed after his first Oval Office encounter with the newly elected Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu. But the chronic nature of the tension is unusual, and according to current and former officials, rooted in ill will at the very top. You have a backdrop of an very acrimonious relationship between the president and the Prime Minister of Israel, said Robert Danon, a Middle East expert at the Council on Foreign Relations. So when this spills into the open, which is not very often, a PR problem arises on both sides. Why is this? What's happening? Well, despite the statement that public opinion in both Israel and the United States is solidly behind the Israeli military's campaign against Hamas, I think that's very deceptive. There are plenty of people in Israel who have been out demonstrating against it. A number of young people in the vicinity of 50 or so have made public their refusal to enter the Israeli military and carry out this campaign of mass killing and in Gaza. At the same time, there are, a number of those people, according to some reports, which you typically will not find in the major media or mass media or corporate media, whatever you want to call them, a number of those people have been attacked on the streets and beaten by Israeli fascists. And it's not a pretty picture over there. So I think this statement is exaggerated, if not provably false. But anyway, what's been happening here in the American media, there was in a fairly local publication called The Times of Israel in the Boston area, there appeared a statement by one Yochanan Gordon on when genocide is permissible, that is, when it's carried out against the enemies of Israel. I will let you refer to that. It set off an enormous furor and was taken down pretty quickly, but it's interesting that it ever appeared there at all. This is in a local digital online publication, apparently, funded by Seth Klarman, the financier behind the Times of Israel. The Times of Israel is, of course, published in the United States and not in Israel. Other headlines I'll just skip through quickly. Israel spying on the U.S. at an alarming level, according to Agence France Presse. Der Spiegel online, Israel eavesdrops on John Kerry in the Mideast talks. U.S. fuming over Israeli criticism of Kerry, which has been pretty strong. And with Israel at war, U.S. lawmakers give full support. In ugly resolution, U.S. politicians back Israel's assault on Gaza. The final thing then is a little story that showed up in an unexpected place. In the News Gazette, of course, the local daily, you would expect assaults on all Democratic office holders. And here's one that amazed me. The one and only overseas investment in Rutherford's portfolio is bonds issued by the Israeli government. This arose because of some statements by our candidate for state treasurer, the Democratic candidate, Mike Frerichs, saying that if he were elected treasurer, he would not invest state funds in foreign places, that they should be invested here within the USA or maybe within the state of Illinois. So he was proposing to change that policy, apparently not knowing at the time that the only overseas investments made by the previous state treasurer, Mr. Rutherford, were in Israel bonds. So he quickly reversed course. This article says, oops, support for Israel has long been an important statewide issue, political issue in Illinois, dating back to at least U.S. Senator Charles Percy, first win, and then his 1984 loss to Paul Simon, because Percy had allegedly become less supportive of the nation of Israel, that is. Mark Kirk made a congressional career out of his unquestioning support for Israel, and that stance helped him to defeat Alex Giannoulias for the U.S. Senate in 2010. There are other examples, but you get the idea. So last week, Tom Cross's campaign, that is Mr. Frerich's opponent for the state treasurer post, blasted Frerichs for his investment proposal. One country that would be singled out under Frerich's plan is Israel. Across news release noted the Office of Treasurer currently has $25 million invested in foreign bonds, all with Israel. Treasurer Rutherford later confirmed that the Israeli government bonds are the only overseas investment his office makes. So if indeed Frerichs wants to invest the state treasurer's portfolio of overseas investments, those Israel bonds are the one and only instruments he could sell off. Frerichs quickly sent out a statement noting that he had co-sponsored a bill encouraging more purchases of the Israeli bonds, and attached a quote from several Jewish state legislators claiming that he was among the most outspoken and vocal advocates for the State of Israel in the Illinois General Assembly. The Frerichs campaign later issued a statement which said in part he would continue investing in Israel bonds as treasurer. To say anything else is flat out wrong, but Cross's hit was politically legitimate, according to this author. He didn't go overboard and frantically accuse Frerichs of being anti-Israel or anti-Semitic, which of course is compulsory in this kind of case. He merely pointed out a simple fact. Frerichs has repeatedly demanded overseas divestiture, and in the real world that can mean only one thing: Israel bonds. So there you are, insufficiently subordinate to the Israel and the Israel lobby, and it may cost him very heavily, as it did Chuck Percy some time ago. That's all.
Thank you very much, Ron. You're listening to, you're watching Aware on the Air, and we have comments from the panel.
So AIPAC isn't just nationally, it's, there's also right here in Illinois, we have
Well, anywhere
lots of-
where someone who doesn't seem sufficiently supportive of Israel pops up, they'll be there.
Wow, so Frerichs, I would support you in withdrawing that money from Israel. Please do it. That's all I have to say.
But you see, those are our political choices. We have the Democrats who say how devoted they are to the State of Israel, and the Republicans who say the Democrats are not devoted enough to the State of Israel. So, you know, take your Democratic choice.
Right. I actually have another comment on the first article, sorry. The camera has to keep moving. I have another comment about the first article you read about, and you talked about the fact that both Israeli citizens and U.S. citizens are not in support of what the governments are doing. And that was very important, even though the article said that we do support them. The other thing that I kind of disagree with is that other countries aren't saying anything about it. And actually the Prime Minister of Turkey and other places have spoken very loudly against what's going on. And so that's the other statement that I would...
Yeah, Roger Cohen is pretty eloquent on this,
Yeah.
saying that most of Europe and almost everywhere outside the USA, it's overwhelmingly against the Israeli warfare against Gaza.
And it's not just the people, but it's also the governments of those countries
Yes.
too, which are, I mean, there's an outrage going on. And so we should be aware of that and not let people like that article get away with saying that the whole world's behind them.
Yeah.
Right.
Carl.
That's the diplomatic cover which the U.S. provides for Israel is part of it is keeping NATO countries and so forth in line when this sort of criticism does occur popularly and publicly in Europe.
I think Yaakov had something.
I had a comment after Ron. I have a comment for last week to begin with, and also a comment for Carl's posted of last night.
That's the intro that I gave today.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I do not support Carl Easterbrook's anti-Obama statements, definitely not as a blanket approval. Carl's statement, oppression of the Palestinians so long as Israel acts as a stationary aircraft carrier for U.S. control of Middle East oil and gas. Well, the U.S. sells arms to Egypt, Turkey, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, feeding the Middle East with as many weapons as they can, the Middle East stock. Nothing changed about that since, as Carl said, the last 2 generations, since 67.
67.
Right.
The military complex is doing its business as usual. Obama hasn't started that, nor stopped it. Yet I prefer Obama to any of the alternative who ran for president last. Last week I pointed at the simplistic US tendency for unambiguous right and wrong. I pointed out the failure of present Israelis and Palestinians to represent Israelis and Palestinians, drawing efforts from an obsolete and inefficient concept that didn't generate desired results. I called and call for seeking a new strategy one which will involve directly Palestinians. Zouki called it off the cuff, completely ineffectual. Abundance of terms taken from Nazi Germany, such as Gaza, a concentration camp. What? People with arms, administrations, elections, a charter calling for the destruction of Israel is a concentration camp? An open-air prison, yes, but not a concentration camp. Zouki called to negotiate with Hamas. I pointed out Zouki that he has no idea of what Hamas say, their charter, their names, and standpoints. Zouki replied to my challenge to name 5 Hamas leaders, incoherent. Hamas don't have designated leaders, and that is their strength. The problem is that Zouki represents so many US intellectuals who essentially have no clue on the Palestinians and Israelis and what they talk about. Ran Zoukis of the US academia never discourse with Israelis and Palestinians. Last week, right after the meeting, I ran a Google search, Hamas leaders. I got 7 names. Muhammad Deif, commander of Hamas military wing. Isra al-Mudallal, spokesperson. Khaled Mash'al, their leader. Abdelaziz al-Rantisi, co-founder. Sheikh Ahmed Ismail Hassan Yassin, founder. Mahmoud al-Zahar, founder. And Ismail Haniyeh, their leader now. Last Tuesday evening, Khaled Mash'al, leader of the Hamas, spoke on Charlie Rose. Last Tuesday, plenty standpoints and clarifications to learn from. There are plenty opportunities to get informed on what Hamas are intent on Hamas' position, on what they are doing, and on their rationale. Also plenty opportunities to get informed on how and why Hamas is using children as human shield, is spending finance assistance for Gaza on building over 100 tunnels into Israel, is launching rockets on Israelis. Ultimately, these standpoints feed into increasing hatred and anti-Zionism, feeding into anti-Israel and anti-Jews, and into anti-Muslims and anti-Palestinians on the other hand. I fully decry that. I think this is not going to bring to any solution. And as I said last week, if we want to find some way to solve these things, we have to start thinking out of the box we've been thinking for the last 2 generations.
I'll just
Thank you,
talk
Ed.
about
Yep.
Obama really quickly. I agree, Obama didn't start all the U.S. government's support of the Israeli government. But if he's guilty of continuing them, then he should be called out for them. On the other hand, any president that is elected at this point would also be pressured into supporting Israel, unless, and I'm going to take responsibility for this, the people of the United States stand up and say, don't do it. There is pressure from the government, and there's the permanent government, and also business interests and other things in order to maintain our relationship with Israel and our support of Israel. But the only thing that could prevent that from happening is if the people not vote. Voting isn't going to help, because everybody who gets elected is going to be pressured by the businesses and stuff. So the people have to get out on the street and say enough is enough and stop it. And so even though Obama is continuing the policies and supporting the Israeli government and the suppression of the Palestinians, and all the other things that he does, including drone wars, and he is continuing the other policies. He himself is guilty of doing it, but we also are guilty for not stopping him from doing it.
Other comments? Yes.
Well, I agree, Karen, completely, and I have, as one of the founders of the U.S. Democrats abroad in Thailand back in the early 90s, I've let my friends, former colleagues with the Democrats know that the Democrats are not going to be supported. They will not be voted for if they continue to support these kind of actions. So the most minor thing we do is vote, but I think that taking away our vote from those that support these actions, while I agree that maybe the Republicans are greater evils, as we've said before, Obama may be a more effective evil. I mean, we have leaders who are committing evil, and it is up to the people to stop it. But we need to let our leaders know we're not going to support it in every way that we can.
Dave has something.
I think the only thing that's false in the discussion of Obama's leadership, such as it is, of American policy, is to think that he somehow is powerless, that he can't do anything, that all his good instincts are being subverted by his CIA director or by the Pentagon or by his vice president, maybe, I don't know. I mean, he campaigned for the job on the mantra of hope and change, and people voted for him expecting hope and change. They voted for him because they wanted hope and change. Well, in fact, what he's done, as colleagues admit, is fallen in precisely to the pattern of American foreign policy in the Middle East and indeed at home as well. He's done exactly what his predecessors have done. The notion that there has been much change at all in any changes in recent American administrations is absolutely false. Since, in regard to the Middle East, since '67, American policy, since the '67 war, American policy has been a support for the State of Israel because of what it does for American policy, not because of undue influence from elsewhere or because of the fecklessness of various American presidents, feckless as they may be. The point about Obama is that he is capable of making choices against the murderous policies that are being followed in Israel and Ukraine right now. Plenty of his predecessors had. The much maligned Ronald Reagan, his leadership much maligned, in 1983 was perfectly able to reverse American involvement in the Lebanese civil war as a result of the horrific bombing of and killing of American and French soldiers in Beirut. The freedom of a sitting president to act is quite great. The continuity of American policy is also quite true. What we have are leaders who have fallen in with, and indeed actively auditioned for, the role that former American presidents have played. There's nothing necessitated about it. There is a remarkable continuity, and Obama is perfectly in step with that. If anything, even a little more vicious than some of the others. His own comments about finding a strong suit in killing people, I think, in fact, probably shocks some people who voted for him. But the idea that we can deal with the issues that we're talking about here today by condemning what Israel does and exculpating the United States seems to me to be just false.
Yeah, I'd like to also comment that I absolutely agree with your statement, Carl, about the people wanting to change. That's why so many people voted for Obama.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, no change occurred.
Right.
In fact, the policies, Obama continued and expanded the policies of George Bush, domestically and internationally. The thing is, too, on comment of Yaakov's, I'm not aware that our tax dollars support Hamas. And I think as an American, when my tax dollars, our tax dollars goes to support a government that basically murders women and children. There is no Palestinian army, navy, or air force comparable to Israel. They have no air force. They have no navy. They have no army. Israel has one of the most modern armies, navies, and air forces in the region. And to say that Hamas is the problem, well, once violence starts, once these sort of things start happening, I mean, it's like an avalanche effect. Violence begets violence. On a positive note, though, I was really heartened to see that over 7,000 Israeli citizens came out for a protest in Tel Aviv against what the Israeli government was doing in Gaza. Also, in the recent past, many Holocaust survivors who are Israeli citizens have condemned what the policies in Gaza and even equated them to what was happening with the Nazis in Europe against Jewish people. What was really interesting to me, though, is a recent poll I saw that was taken in Israel right before the Gaza assault began, in which a majority of Israelis support creating a Palestinian state. That's a promising sign. We always have to look for hope amongst the horrible realities that are there. And it seems to be a common thread that most places in the world, governments are not doing the will of their people. Lastly, I think it's telling, I want to put out a comment about Israeli dissidents. Very brave people. They suffer horribly for their courage. I mean, they're denied employment. They're harassed and arrested by the Shin Bet. They are attacked by right-wing fascist mobs and beaten up. And there's a large number of Israelis, especially young people, who are now immigrating in large numbers to both the United States and Germany as well, to leave Israel. Some of it's for economic reasons, but of course a lot of it is because of the political turmoil that's going on. I think the people of the world want peace. It's often that we find politicians and the special interests behind those politicians who do not want peace because they profit from these situations one way or another.
Carl,
Sure.
first, just for the record, David, I did not say that the U.S. supports Hamas or sell them weapons. I said that U.S. is sells arms to Egypt, Turkey,
Yes.
Iraq. Okay.
Yes. I'm sorry, Yaakov, what I meant was that you said that we're knowledgeable of Hamas, that we should know more about Hamas. That's probably a good thing in general.
We aware.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
We should be aware
Yes.
of Hamas.
That's
Yes.
true. But I'm saying what I was trying to say, and I'm sorry if it was a misunderstanding,
No problem.
that because our tax dollars supports the current government of Israel, both military and economically, that is why we should be more concerned about that. But I do concede that we should be more knowledgeable of Hamas.
But I also would like to continue a point which I
Absolutely.
like very much.
Yes.
So about the resentment and the outcry within Israel. So yes, 7,000, and there were many other demonstrations. There will be more demonstrations. There are some demonstrations that don't make it to the New York Times,
Right.
but they make it to wherever it hurts. So what I wanted to point out also in response to Ron today is that there is also harsh criticism within the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, and the government. Well, the government is basically like a joke, but essentially in the Knesset, there are now voices calling for seizing the opportunity that is given now when Abbas and the Palestinian Authority are, as we speak, leaving already Cairo, because they spoke yesterday our time at midnight. They spoke there about the ceasefire, the conditions. So the Israeli Knesset members, some of them are saying, let's seize this opportunity to reinforce those non-militant Palestinians with whom we want and can and need to talk. So that's exactly a moment, that was also the whole 4 weeks, were an opportunity to see how Abbas, that was described like a demon by the Israeli government before that, they essentially behaved so well and so collaborative with any attempt of a humanitarian or ceasefire. So that is, again, something that is happening in Israel. Now, there is also a lot that is happening within Palestinian people in Gaza and in the West Bank. Those things need to be amplified. I think that we need now to find any means possible to hear those voices and to amplify them and find ways to augment what is described by Netanyahu, who supposedly assigned himself to be the spokesperson for Hamas. He speaks about Hamas. He says everything he wants about Hamas. But the people in Palestine, the people in Gaza in English, those people also have a voice. So to hear them, to provide for them some kind of a megaphone for what they have to say. There's an example, I think, that has to do with what has been said also by the other people here. This example, I'm going to relate to it through Israel is fuming at Kerry and what he did. Well, why is Israel fuming at Kerry? What is it? He kind of he smoked in public or something? What did he do? There are reasons to that. The reasons to that are that Kerry went and did something that forgot the essential coalition, strong coalition that has to do with the Muslim Brotherhood that exists between Hamas and Turkey and Qatar. They did not want that. They did want Egypt, to be those who are going to negotiate and to be those who are running the show, because number one, they are not pro-Muslim Brotherhood, and number two, they are, like I said last week, they are essentially controlling the other gate into Gaza. They are responsible as well to what comes in and out into Gaza. And they are going to commit themselves now to some kind of a monitoring of what is happening in Gaza. So that was the interest that the Israelis were after. Now, whether that's justified or not, that's a different thing. But Kerry did not pay attention to that. We are talking about people who are going to pay the price with their lives about what is happening now in Cairo. Those people are not about discussing, the Ukraine. I was just listening to what we say here. How does a person from Gaza listen to what we are saying here? What's in it for him or her? Or how is a person from Ashdod in Israel that was basically rocketed for the past 4 weeks? How are they? What's in it for them? We have to take into account that those are lives of people that are here being played with. And that's what I'm saying. We need to pay more attention and to amplify more those people, those voices, our attention.
Sorry, I know lots of people want to say things. I just want to say a couple things. First of all, if you have to choose between Palestinian Authority and Hamas to negotiate with, of course Israel's going to say, let's talk to the Palestinian Authority and forget Hamas. And as a person who would support the people of Gaza, I wouldn't support either one of them. Because the Palestinian Authority is willing to bend over backwards to do and not to pay attention to the Gazan people. First of all, the Palestinian Authority is very compromising to the Israeli government, and Hamas is very violent. So between those two, what can you do? And those were their choices for government. So, okay. And the other thing I would say is that the people in Israel are not as under attack by the bombs as the media would indicate. That yes, bombs head their way. Yes, the Iron Dome works. Yes, they have to head for a shelter. But it's nothing compared to what the people in Gaza have to suffer every day. And yeah, I'll stop there. But basically, if you have to choose between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, Israel benefits from Hamas being there, because then they can wage a massacre,
But
saying that they're trying to get rid of Hamas. And that's
maybe it's not up to us or to the American government to choose between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. It's up to the people of the occupied territories.
Yeah.
And in fact, they did that.
Yeah.
In 2006, there was a free election, as free as such elections can be on the international scale of these things, a free elections in which the people in the occupied territories chose Hamas as their representatives, or gave them majority of seats in their assembly to Hamas, rather than the Palestinian Authority. The Bush administration and Condoleezza Rice were roundly condemned for this at the time. How dare they allow a free election amongst the Palestinians? You can't possibly do that. They might choose wrong. Well, they did choose wrong. They chose Hamas. Hamas is a very peculiar beast, actually. Hamas was founded in part by Israel. The actual founder of Hamas was, Yaakov mentioned, Sheikh Ahmad Yassin, a particularly nasty anti-Semite and member of the Muslim Brotherhood. And in the late 80s, he put together the Hamas Party with the aid of Israel. Why did Israel help Sheikh Yassin to put together Hamas? To undercut Fatah, the other half, or the major party amongst the Palestinians. This, by the way, is not new. The U.S. has regularly used religious parties to undercut secular nationalist parties throughout the Middle East, going back to Nasser's time. The U.S. was behaving quite traditionally in this regard when, in 2006, when Hamas became the legitimate government of the Palestinian territory, of the occupied territories. What the U.S. did was engineer a coup against Hamas in order to put Fatah party back into authority, and the coup succeeded within the occupied territories. It failed in Gaza. That is, the people of Gaza resisted the coup, and as a result, Hamas was left, the elected government, with control of Gaza, but not the occupied territories. Okay, this history is important because what started this present murderous outrage by Israel was an agreement the beginning of June between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, an agreement to form a unity government on terms set up by the U.S. and the EU. That was what set the Israeli government off. The danger was that peace might break out, i.e. that they might have to do a deal with a now reconstituted Palestinian government. They couldn't have that, and as a result, they ginned up this war that's now killed a couple of thousand people. So the demonization of Hamas has been a major part of the American and Israeli propaganda on this matter, and the object of this propaganda is primarily the American people, in order to maintain American support for Israeli actions, which the U.S. is. I mean, we'd be perfectly happy for them to go away, but the value of Israel to America, to the American government, is too great for that to happen. Sure.
And Egypt isn't a good broker either.
Oh, I was just going to say on this topic of Hamas, I would like to recommend a book. It was published in 2007, written by Richard Ehrlich. There's a foreword by Robert Baer, former CIA, and Noam Chomsky. And the title is Interviews with Terrorists. And he actually goes in and interviews, most of them actually, some are current terrorists, some are actually former terrorists, and one was the leader of Hamas. Now, as I said, it's a little bit dated, 2007, but it's very worthwhile. He also then interviews a member of the Knesset, I think 2 members of the Knesset who were also former terrorists. So I would like to mention that. On the topic of history being so important, that's what I was going to talk about. I picked up something late the other day because at some point you have to get your head out of the massacre going on in Gaza. And I grabbed this nonfiction book that I had not read off my shelf by Eric Larson, titled In the Garden of Beast. Well, it turns out it's about, it's not going to be light, I don't think, because it deals with Berlin in 1933 and our ambassador, I think it's William F. Dodd, who was sent over there from the University of Chicago. But it was really telling. I mean, I barely got through the preface and I thought to myself, some things never change. Because these Americans who are well educated, and he was, Ambassador Dodd was actually an historian, and had lived in Germany previously, nonetheless they go in there knowing what was happening in 1933, they still thought that, oh, well, things will improve. These people aren't so terrible. These Nazis, they're not as bad as they appear, Hitler, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought to myself how easily we are charmed, how easily when people who appear to be educated and intelligent and charming, how easily they can fool the public. And on that topic, I'm also reading Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman's After the Cataclysm. This was published or actually written in 1979 about our war in Indochina. And again, I'm barely through the preface, and here again, I'm seeing parallels to so many things happening today. Even though, as Noam Chomsky himself points out, that historical comparisons are of only limited value, too many factors vary from case to case, but nonetheless, you see so many things that happened back then that I'm seeing happening today. So I'm just would like to recommend these books. And now I let you go back to what you've been discussing, which I think is much more important.
Thank you, Karen. Other comments?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say, Annette Yakov's comments, is that I've found nothing in there that is in conflict with anything that I said, insofar as there's any definite content to it at all. I could frame any proposition out of it. And in general, what he says seems to me so vague and confused and incoherent that I have a hard time dealing with it, and just can't get a hold of it. So that's my statement.
We have enough trouble dealing with our own incoherence, huh?
Right.
No reason for anybody else's. Go ahead.
Don't we all?
I probably will give up on trying to respond to anything that Ron said. I think that my response today was accurate enough. And like I said, it has to do with Ron Zokis of the world, not with one person on this panel, maybe a good friend. I want to support what Carl and what Karen said about the history part of it, what you said about Hamas and the way in which the United States endorsed the whole colonial exercise that Sharon pulled with the disengagement, and then Olmert continued into the cast-led. So that was the other, the whole campaign, the murder that preceded this one in 2009. So still, I think that we have to understand that history is telling us all those things, but then what does it teach us, not you, Ron? What does it teach us about what to do today? People come to their houses or to the rubble that is now their houses in Gaza or in Ashdod or in Sderot. And they have to keep doing something. They have to do something about what's going on. People are now retreating from the Gaza Strip, the Israeli soldiers, knowing that they go home and they will get another order before they know it, to come back to another such campaign. So what do we do about our knowledge of history, and how do we learn from it in order to prevent a recurrence of this? I think that's the most important thing, because maybe that has to do with the name of this group, AWARE. Being aware in order to do what? In order to act on something, in order to prevent it, right? It's aware, and then there are efforts. Our efforts are to do something so that we no longer repeat all these horrible atrocities that have been made.
Well, maybe you would like to join us. We do have protests and demonstrations on a regular basis. We do a regular one monthly, but we've been doing others as well, simply over the Gaza massacre, sorry. So you might like to join us on that. We also, most of us have probably signed dozens and dozens of petitions to our leaders, to our representatives. There have been many activities, but most of all, trying to raise the consciousness of the American people to the atrocities that are happening. That is what we're doing, and so we welcome anyone to join us.
You know, and two, it seems to me that if we're looking at what we can do to prevent this, we're looking at it from the perspective of Americans. So we have, that gives us a certain responsibility, I think. And it seems to me that my impression is, and I might be wrong because I haven't studied it that much, but my impression is, from what I've heard, that if we weren't funding this, it wouldn't be happening.
Right.
So it
Right.
just seems to me that's the thrust that I wish to take in terms of dealing with this. And,
I think it was
Exactly.
very much that impulse or that observation that led to the founding of AWARE in the first place, where it was founded just after the 9/11 attacks. But the impulse grew out of Martin Luther King's remark years earlier that our country is, we have to admit it, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. Now, it was not only true in 1967, it's also true after 2001, and it's true today as well. That's why our attempt to lessen the horror and violence in the world is directed to the American government, the great purveyor of violence. But the defense that we have to break through in order to deal with that is the massive misrepresentation by the American government of what it's doing. Most Americans, and people are not fools after all, most Americans believe that American governments are promoting peace, democracy, and commerce around the world. And that every now and then these nasty terrorists turn up and begin shooting at Americans who are just out there trying to promote peace and democracy. Now, I mean, that notion is indeed the view of most of our fellow citizens. Not because they're stupid, but because they're the objects of the greatest PR campaign in history. The campaign to convince them that that is indeed what the U.S. is doing. There's only one enemy that the American government, working for the 1%, really fears. And that one enemy is the population of the United States. That's what they're the ones that have to be squared so that the American government can continue to work for its masters. That work has produced, over the last 50 years, the deaths of literally millions of people around the world as a result of American policy. What we want people to be aware of is what that American policy actually is, what the American government is actually doing, over against what they say they're doing. And the task is to make people aware of what our government is responsible for, how and why it's the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, and thereby try to lessen that violence.
And here we are, we just shipped, you know, people are saying, oh, poor Kerry, he's doing his best. Well, then why did we ship more weapons and arms only, what,
exactly.
2 weeks ago or a week ago? So, you know, it's not what we say, it's what we do. Look at our behavior, not just what we say all the time, so.
You have been watching Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group, in the 32nd week of 2014. We have a couple of minutes, a concluding comment. Anyone?
There appears in a number of publications, this one is in the Daily Illini of this week, the campus newspaper at the University of Illinois, an ad sponsored by a group called FLAME, Facts and Logic About the Middle East. And I've seen these, a number of these over the years. Here's a paragraph from America's staunchest ally. While Israel receives $3 billion annually in military aid from the U.S., fully 75% of this money must be spent with U.S. military contractors, making Israel a large customer of those companies. This is one of the few places I've seen an explicit acknowledgement of something else that's been said here from time to time. This group says that Israel is indeed America's unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Middle East and the indispensable defender of America's interests in that area of the world. So this is part of the campaign to insist that American interests and Israeli interests in the Middle East are absolutely, perfectly, precisely congruent in all respects. And they must not allow any daylight to open up between those because of the situation that would create for Zionists and the Israel lobby in the USA.
And Yaakov pointed out that our support of Saudi Arabia and its policies are also, and militarily, is also really important too. And all of our sending of troops and military aid to countries in the Middle East in general. Yeah, it's not just Israel, but it's a lot of countries.
You know, it's weird the way we give money to someone to then buy our product. I
Right.
mean, if the department stores, if the supermarkets did this, wouldn't we all be happy? But think about it, it's U.S. taxpayers' money that goes to support Israel so they can buy weapons from who? Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, I'm not sure. But I thought,
All of them.
yeah, all of them, and make the 1%
Exactly, Karen. The money those checks don't even leave the United States. They're just sent from the Pentagon or from the government to those companies.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
So, I mean, what a scam.
Indeed.
Well, there are many plain Americans who think that they are opposed to foreign aid, that we should cut our deficit by eliminating foreign aid. And yet, when they hear, the biggest recipient of foreign aid from the USA is Israel, then you can count on a sudden reversal of position.
But it's still instructive that the biggest recipient is Israel, and the second biggest is Egypt. And I mean, this is not out of the goodness of the American heart, or even the evil of the American heart. It's policy. It's business.
Right. Yep.
This is what the U.S. was buying in the Middle East: control through major clients. And there's an effective alliance. American policy in the Middle East sits on a tripod of Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. It was once an interestingly different tripod: Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. But there were some changes there, eh? And thereby hangs a tale. You've been watching Aware on the Air for the 32nd week of 2014. Our thanks to Jason Liggett and Yosef Cash for direction and production. Thanks to whom also this program and others like it will be available on YouTube. Finally, Aware honors those who reveal the crimes of the U.S. government, which the rest of the world knows, but Americans don't. Manning, Assange, Snowden, and others who are being persecuted by the Obama administration. Now, this is Carl Estabrook for Karen Aram, Ron Zook, Karen Evans-Levy, Stuart Levy, David Johnson, David Green, Yaakov Ziso, perhaps, and other members of Aware, saying, and Pam Carsey, saying in the words of the late Edward Murrow, good night and good luck.